Generally, I would go around the room and ask everyone to, so I'm just going to benchmark that we're all in a room where the meeting we're here for is to speak about and learn about the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, which is open for consultation right now. So if that's not what you were coming to, you're in the wrong room. And this is being done on behalf of the Biodiversity Caucus of the RCEN. So I'm going to start. So Larry McDermott, who is a Algonquin Indigenous member, he's Algonquin, and he's very busy, but he is part of the caucus, and he might pipe in at some point and get us going, talk to some of the issues or some of the substantive matter. But since I don't see him, Larry, are you here? Okay, so on the slide deck, you should all see the screen. So what I'm going to do is speak to the opening on just this. So I live and work on the treaty lands and the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation Agents Treaty number 19, which was in 1818. It was signed. It includes the north of the head of the Lakes Purchase. I also recognize the long shared history and occupation from other Indigenous nations in where I am now, including the Nation Huron-Wendat, 6 nations of the Grand River, and the Métis Nation of Ontario. We all have responsibilities as treaty people. So all of us in this room are treaty people in some way, shape, or form. So the next thing I want to do just before we go any further is just kind of take a moment and take a deep breath in through the nose, out through the mouth, maybe 2 or 3 times, and just kind of settle ourselves and place ourselves, ground ourselves into being open, listening with our ears, listening with our hearts, speaking with our hearts, speaking without prejudice, and speaking for the land. So I just want to take a moment, like 30 seconds, and just sit with ourselves.
In progress.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to ask if people are not speaking, if they can mute themselves, please. And the image you see in front of you right now is the image from United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization. And it's really related to Indigenous learning from a landscape level. So using the landscape as the point of departure for learning. And we can dive into that at some point, but that's not why we're here today. So I thank you very much for your patience and your contributions today. And I hope we all learn and garner something from this. So next slide. So we are the Biodiversity Caucus of RCEN, and what we're meeting on today is the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, which flows from international work. Next slide. So the caucus has been around since about 2007. We were a working group for about 2 years. And then in 2010, I believe our history is we became a formal caucus. So we've always worked to work from the international agenda. So we're not only thinking of biodiversity as plants and animals out there, we're using the understanding from the Convention on Biodiversity. And we are really seeking to enable the Convention of Biodiversity in Canada as well. So we have a steering committee, and then some of us are on the steering committee that are here today. We also have like a caucus list. So that's people who are interested in this subject matter or might have particular areas they want to focus on that just get emails and could come to things like this, that too. So the steering committee itself is comprised of Fred Perrin-Welsh, myself, Leslie Adams, Larry McDermott, Chantal Garneau, Rosalind, I'm forgetting your last name. It's not coming to me.
Warner.
Thank you. I'm there. Oh no, Rosalind Warner, John Coombs, Hannah Carey, right? Yes, that's correct. And then Lindre's last name is escaping me as well. And I probably forgot someone. I feel like
Delnitrix, I think her name is.
yeah, I don't remember her last name off the top of my. Oh, and Sheila Cole, of course, and Sheila Cole. I'm quickly scrolling through here. So we are your illustrious steering committee, and we are working hard to enable this piece. Our core work right now is really to get us engaged in this process of updating the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. So NBSAP, lots of acronyms in the world I live in. So we also do other work, obviously, but we're just kind of getting our feet under us again and getting going. So if you do want to, Nell is the last name Cora's telling us, which thank you, Cora. If you do want to get involved with the caucus, please reach out if you're just kind of randomly here. The other thing I'll say is the RCN has affiliates across the country. I don't know if we are in all the countries right now, but most of them as well will be doing work on biodiversity. So next slide. What I got next. Oh, so this is just the overview. We're going to go through the session. So Fred Perrin-Welch is going to speak quite eloquently. He's an international lawyer. He's been working on biodiversity related policy and national work for a long time. And I'm going to speak a little bit to the national process. Roz is going to take us through the species conservation and needs for action piece. And then the questions and the national consultation I'll lead again on, and then we're into next steps. So next slide, please. So this is really Fred's role here. I might sub in something, and we're going to go. This is very tandem and tag team. And if you do have any questions or any comments, as you're hearing what's going on, if you can put comments into the chat, is awesome. But we're also going to, if people have something they want to say, put a hand up during the conversation, and we can try to attend to that too. But anything you're thinking, put it in the chat, because this is going to form part of what we send to the government at the end of the day. So Fred Perrin-Welch, if you would like to introduce yourself a little bit, and when it gets back to me, I'll do the same thing on who I am.
Hi, I'm Frederick Perrin-Welch. I'm a lawyer called to the Bar of Ontario, and I've been working on CBD implementation and international environmental law for almost 15 years now. And my specialty is in the CBD. So this instrument was negotiated in the lead up to the 1992 Rio Earth Summit and was open for signature there alongside the Convention on Climate Change. And the decision was made to negotiate a convention on land degradation and desertification at the Earth Summit as well. These three treaties are usually known as the Rio Conventions. The CBD's secretariat is based in Montreal, has been there since, I think, 1996. And it operates through the secretariat, but in a 2-year cycle, through the conference of the parties and the meetings that happen in the intersessional period that are linked to issues that have been selected during the COP process. As Leslie mentioned, the caucus is looking really at mainstreaming biodiversity at the domestic level, bringing this international treaty into national law and policy, and also on building a link to the Sustainable Development Goals that we are aiming to achieve by 2030. Next slide. Canada was very strongly involved in the development of the CBD and the Earth Summit. The CBD itself was adopted as an umbrella agreement so that it would address all wildlife and biodiversity issues under one agreement, with the possibility of adopting additional protocols for specific issues. The first one was the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety, which addresses living modified organisms or genetically modified organisms. The second protocol is on access to genetic resources and benefit sharing from those from that access. As I mentioned, the conferences of the parties are the main decision-making bodies of the CBD. They happen every 2 years, and the latest was COP15 in Montreal, where the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework was adopted, and that is covering the period 2022 to 2030. The intersessional meetings that take place and where some RCEN members have participated, including Leslie, for example, include the subsidiary body on implementation and the subsidiary body on scientific, technical, and technological advice, which are the main institutional bodies of the convention. And these are complemented by meetings of expert groups and committees with work plans that are established by the COPs. So Leslie can maybe give a little bit of a description of some of her work in this type of process.
Would you like me to do that now, Fred?
If you think that it's good. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So through the caucus, so we not only try to contribute information to the federal government or the national strategy. So we both participate with the federal government on the international side in helping to form national directions to the international bodies. So there's a real nuanced difference between the federal government and what they do for the domestic policy, which is what we're talking about today, and the international policy. So on the international policy side, the caucus has done a lot of work. We wind up being involved with all the way through, right? It's not just at the 11th hour and show up at COP, but doing all the background work to get us to the conference of the parties, to be on the delegations. But we also work directly with the Secretariat and with subnational and other ENGOs and NGOs and civil society organizations that are interested in the international side particularly. So we helped structure and set up the Global Youth Biodiversity Network in 2010, which is where we had our first set of goals and targets, the HE goals and targets that what we're talking about today is building on. And so it was youth from Canada who were with youth from the international community, with support from the international policy branch from the federal government on site in Japan, that actually started the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. And now we have a Canadian Youth Biodiversity Network that's established, and probably there's someone involved with the caucus because we're trying to find a focal point for youth again. But so if you get very much involved with this, and this is the benefit, I think, is being able to recognize the international stuff and how can I apply it? How do I domesticize what's going on? How do I get it here and then point to it? But we've commented on many, many, many of the substantive issues that are worked at the international level, and make statements in plenaries and things like that. Fred has represented RCN, but there's lots of, like, this whole area is so relevant to everything we do. And it's also, so when we talk about biodiversity, we're really using the objectives of the CBD, of the Convention on Biodiversity, which are sustainable use, conservation, and fair share. And we're also thinking of biodiversity as genes and genetic materials, species, all of it, us too, and ecosystems. So it's a little broader than just plants and animals, I guess. And Fred, did I answer anything you asked me to do?
Maybe I'll pose more of a question, because you had worked on the on some communications and public awareness
Okay.
expert groups, and maybe you could share your experience on that.
Okay. Yeah. So the SEPA is a tool that you'll see sprinkled around in other UN treaties. So Ramsar uses a SEPA approach. So SEPA is communication, education, and public awareness. So I was selected and supported by the federal government to sit on the informal advisory committee for SEPA for 4 years. And was wonderful meetings in Montreal, getting to know the international community, working with country and with other ENGOs, but really trying to figure out ways to mainstream the agenda across all of society. So and like in all corners of the planet kind of thing, and with all people. So yeah, I mean, it really is about embodying it and enabling it. And this, so the SEPA is still an informal advisory committee that's moving on. And one of the key things I think that there's lots of key things we did, but I'm going to guess everyone's familiar with the World Wildlife Fund's international movement for in March when you shut your lights off for climate change. So they pivoted and have been pivoting for about 3 or 4 years now to move it towards the Convention on Biological Diversity and doing actions for biodiversity. So yeah, I mean, lots of resources there too.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a good a good example of some of the work that members of the caucus do between the COPs. So staying involved year round in different processes and being able to drive those processes as NGO participants. Maybe not in a defining way, but still playing an important role in the implementation of the convention. Could we have the next slide, please? Leslie, did you want to speak to this? You're muted.
Realize that. So I'm going to kind of lead us through a little bit about the Canadian Biodiversity Strategy. Like it comes out of it really, there's all sorts of moving parts here, but just trying to ground us in what's gone on before us so we can move forward. So the strategy itself, so we don't have an act, we have a strategy that was written in the 90s, and that is still in place. There's been some updates to it, well, not necessarily updates, some enhancement of it, but it's the implementation tool that we use for biodiversity in Canada is our Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So the Biodiversity Outcomes Framework in 2020 Goals and Targets. I can flip I'm not going to do it, I don't think, but so those were established. Actually, I will. So can I share my screen? Yeah. I'm going to do this. Where are you? I'm going to find my internet. There. No, that's not it. That's not what I want. I think it's this. It is here. Share this. I'm pretty sure I have it here. Oh, Vic, and I'm on a call. So sorry. Anyway, so I'm not going to try to do this. Can you take the screen sharing back from me? So I'm doing this in my house, not in an office. Full disclosure. But the goals and targets, the way they were structured in, I have to stop sharing first, don't I? Sorry. The goals and target as they were structured in 2025 or 20. Oh, the 2010 to 2020 goals and targets, the federal government only had to put them in place it was 2015 before we had national goals and targets in place. So the goals and targets themselves kind of, I mean, they're good, a lot of conservation based because it's all seeded out of Environment Canada, but they didn't align themselves completely with the HE goals and targets. So we're hoping one of the outcomes we're hoping, or the caucus is kind of hoping for, is that we kind of move towards more alignment with it. So the biodiversity outcomes framework and 2020 goals and targets, and not getting a clarity in my brain here, even though I was really involved in putting this together, is really there's no, it's not an act, it's not law, it's really goodwill and enabling. The one thing I think that is very good about what we have in place right now is that it is a national strategy, not a federal strategy, and that all provinces have come to the table, had to come to the table to create the federal goals and targets, or the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. As we're updating it and going through what's going on now, there is some chatter that that is not the case. So a lot of the work that we do through the CBD does support in other countries, particularly developing countries, in helping meet their goals and targets and helping meet the CBD outcomes. But can we go to the next slide? Fred, you want to go back to this? I'm going to hide and see if I can find what I was looking for too.
Essentially, the biodiversity outcomes framework was something that built upon the Canadian Biodiversity Strategy, making it look a bit more at how they were going to achieve the biodiversity strategy, looking more at the outcomes rather than the overall picture. I have the 20 goals on hand, but as Leslie mentioned, there was some failure to align Canada's 2020 goals and targets with the international goals and targets, which actually turned out to be a serious shortcoming of the biodiversity targets. There was quite a lot of discretion left to parties as to how they would implement their targets, how they would adopt national targets that would contribute to the global targets. But as you can see here in this slide, there was a lack of clearly defined metrics by which to gauge progress, and there was a failure to align national goals with international goals, meaning that in the 5th Global Biodiversity Outlook, launched in advance of COP15, none of the IHE goals were actually fully met. So the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework that was adopted late last year gives us a far more detailed plan with built-in monitoring framework and some preliminary indicators, making sure that we start with a focus on measurability and making sure that we can achieve the 23 targets that have been adopted at the international level, essentially under 3 different headers of reducing threats to biodiversity, meeting people's needs through sustainable use and benefit sharing, and then tools and solutions for implementation and mainstreaming. And for the first time, this has also included the adoption of targets by corporate actors. So you'll find that companies now are starting to try and find out how they can themselves move towards taking part in the implementation of the framework, and and making sure they have indicators for that. Next slide, please. Rosalind.
Thanks so much, Fred and Leslie. That was really, really detailed, and I learned a lot about how the CBD works. So now we're shifting a little bit towards looking at Canada. And as was noted by the previous speakers, Canada has been intimately and closely involved with the global process for many, many years. But Canada also has responsibility for large areas of biodiversity. For example, 94% of the world's remaining wilderness are found in only 20 countries. Canada is responsible for the second largest area of wilderness. And so when we say that we're not really living up to our obligations, that's what we mean, is that it's our obligations as a country, as having sovereignty over the lands that Canada rules as Canadians. And it's also an obligation to the world and to the planet, right? So, for example, there's 1 million species at risk globally. 1 in 5 wild species are at risk of disappearing in Canada. And of course, with biodiversity, we don't just mean wild species or wilderness. We also mean the whole totality of the diversity of life in all of its aspects. We have the second largest area of wilderness. We have made some progress in setting up protected areas and parks, but at the same time, we're still a long way from really meeting our obligations. For example, we today have 1,000 times higher extinction rate versus before humans. So just to give us some perspective on Canada's role and what we're responsible for, we're not just responsible for our own lands, but we're also responsible for helping countries around the world that don't have the same wealth or capacity that Canadians have. At the same time, we also have a special responsibility in that we, as I say, have sovereignty over large parts of the planet. Next slide, please. So that brings me to some of the policy and legislative gaps. So just to say a bit about my perspective, I teach political science and I teach environmental policy. And so one of the things that I look at and that I urge my students to look at is what are the gaps in the policy frameworks that we have in place. Unfortunately, the biodiversity file has not done well. And we sometimes focus, perhaps hyper-focus a bit on climate. And obviously climate is a huge issue. Climate threatens biodiversity as well. There are mutual benefits that can be had from improving our biodiversity policies and also improving our climate policies. But one of the things that we're finding, and this is kind of explaining what the gaps are, is that although science is telling us, what we need to do, the kind of goals that we need and how ambitious we need to be, these aren't always translated into policy initiatives. So they get hung up on various things. One, sometimes the lack of human resources and financial resources. The government needs to actually invest. And biodiversity means, protecting biodiversity means that we need to invest in nature and find ways of revaluing nature's contribution to human well-being. In some cases, there's a lack of data. We find that there's a creeping pace of action. We have a Species at Risk Act. Unfortunately, although it's fairly new, 2002, it's creeps along at a very slow rate, and the recommendations that are made are often not followed up on. Meanwhile, science is continuing to tell us that species are suffering, that they're being threatened on a number of fronts, from loss of habitat to endangered species to pollution to expansion of human population That's displacing species from their habitats. A third problem is that we kind of undervalue the role of ecosystem services, as they're sometimes called, or ecosystem goods, or sometimes also called the contribution of nature to human well-being. I mean, we forget that when we talk about employment, when we talk about housing, when we talk about social needs, that these are in many ways, dependent upon our relationship with nature and dependent upon the biodiversity and health of the natural environment. But we don't value those, right? So we think of them as either externalities or simply freely available. And in Canada, we're particularly guilty of this, and it's partly because we're so blessed. We have so much abundance, but we haven't recognized the corresponding responsibility. So the big thing, I mean, this is why it's in big letters, is we don't have any comprehensive national legislation. And a good comparison, although it does have problems, is the US's EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. It has national scope. It goes beyond just federal lands and also affects land management all across the country, water management all across the country. And the Endangered Species Act has a lot more teeth in the United States than any comparable strategy that we have in Canada. Now, it's not necessarily the case that the Endangered Species Act is the best thing, but we do need a made in Canada approach to biodiversity protection. Next slide.
Whoops. So I think this goes back to me, Roz.
Yeah, so I think we're now moving to what are we doing, right? What's our action as a caucus?
Yeah, and so why we're here today too. So before we go into this, so we're going to look at the survey. There's a couple of other documents. I did find the goals and targets, Canada's goals and targets on the CBD website. So I want to share that. I want to share my screen, but I just wanted to underscore or note that we are having, so this is kind of introductory workshop. And if there's anyone who wants to get involved and say more questions, so Mia has put other specific species that Canada could focus on for the. These are all good questions, and that's the type of thing we can have conversations about for sure. But we are going to have another session where we'll bring in subject matter experts on what we see as gaps, and then also trying to bring to the table different voices, and have another webinar where what you give to us, and there'll be more conversation, I hope. We're going to submit that to the federal government. And then there is probably also an opportunity to do directed consultation with the federal government. So I'm not sure what that looks like, trying to sort it through right now. But I just wanted to note that. So I would like to, so we're going to open up to having some type of conversation in about 7 to 10 minutes. But can you let me have the control of the screen now again, Cass, please? Because I found what I'm looking for. Okay, so here we go. Sure. So if someone can let me know when they see my screen, either thumbs up.
We can see
Good.
it. Yeah.
Okay. So in 2015, this is the hang on, I want to close this somehow. Go away. Oh, I'm so bad at this. So these are the national goals and targets that Canada submitted to the Convention on Biological Diversity. So you'll see the reference on this is our goal A, and then this is how it related to the 20 goals and targets from the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Aichi goals and targets, named after the prefect in Japan, where it came into being. So goal A, 2020 lands and waters are planned and managed using it. So this is very different. So if you look at reference in goal A and you go over to what it goes to in the goals and targets on the HE side, it's very scattered, right? It's not, so you couldn't really align them one to the other. They're still very important. It was well done. There was also a very good Indigenous reflection in this. There's the ICE report, the We Stand Together report, but Canada really, 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 really did focus on the protected areas work. So by 2020, at least 70% of terrestrial areas and inland waters and 10% of coastal marine. So we're still there. So this is a function of being a conservation Environment Canada, and we are, so where the portfolio sits within Environment Canada is within the Canadian Wildlife Services, right? So it's really related to that sub part of Environment Canada, and it's reflected in what is here to a large degree. But these were our goals and targets as they stood. So now I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to go to another screen because I tried to do this before and I couldn't get there. So the next thing I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about the consultation. Has anyone looked at the consultation document yet at all? So I did that, and I want to, whoops, now have I shared it? New share, there we go. New share. I'm so bad at this. I need someone to come and hold my hand. Where did you go? So, do you guys, hang on. Do you see this now? Are you seeing my screen? Yes. Right.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Jade. So this is a, and you don't see your faces in the corner, do you? No. Anyways, it doesn't matter. So this is a copy of the survey. So if no one, so what I'm trying to do is have you know what you're going into right now. So this is I went into the survey and I took out all the content. So this background bit that we're on right now, so this is all on separate pages. I'll let you know when the pages start, but this is telling you, and you really need to go have a look at the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And there's a link to it in the survey, and we're going to go to the background document in a minute. And it's also to read the background document before you do it, before you go into this survey. So I would encourage everyone to, we have till the end of July or the middle of July to do the survey. I would encourage everyone to go and do it individually and get other people to go and do it. And if you're really passionate about something, have conversations with people to enable them, like just the local guy on the street, your brother, your sister, your boss at work, whatever it might be, to take part in saying something about this. So this is the background of the survey, and then it goes into the demographic information. So there's a privacy note. There's asks you, have you read? So this one here, have you read the strategy? Go and do it. It's not long. It is about 20 pages, but honestly, there's not a lot of content there, or there is good content, but there's not a lot you really need to read. Then your age, your gender, all the general, are you doing it on behalf of a group? Are you with the group? All this. So this is all the demographic stuff. And then this one is, where do you get information related to biodiversity programs, policies, yada, yada. So very simple. And then they get into the survey. So there's really only 8 questions in the survey. And so what I've done is, you can see the yellow highlighting is the question they're asking you. And then they give you options, and then they ask you to select up to 5. So if anyone wants a copy of this is just like a copy of what the feds have up on their survey. I have asked them if they can send me one that would, from their lens, but I just did this morning. So the question here is really, what thematic areas of the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework should Canada prioritize and focus efforts on? So this is kind of giving us a sense of where those headline areas are, and which ones do we think, or you think, or your organization thinks you should focus on. So this is again up to 5. What areas do you think Canada is already making noticeable progress on? So, and you can do this, like you can do none, don't, like it's very straightforward, right? It's all, so Canada's Biodiversity 2030 strategy to be successful. What are the key features that should be included? Goes through it again. Challenges do you see in Canada, halting and reversing biodiversity loss? Again, so, but which of the following groups should be more involved in efforts to halt and reverse biodiversity loss? And we will have opinions on all this as well. What skills and expertise do you think organizations need to hone? Then in what ways could the government best support you to do more towards halting and reversing biodiversity loss? So yeah, I got ideas. And what roles do you see your community in supporting actions? So again, I mean, good generic general questions that I want to understand if they're going to do well. We got 97 people who think we should be, let's pick one here, sharing science and data, or 95% of the respondents, because they were all came from a particular community, they're sharing science and data. So I think we have to be careful because surveys aren't always the best thing to do. So this piece is the optional piece. So these questions are the questions that you see in the discussion paper as well. So we'll go to that in a second. And these are, I personally feel they've done a decent job between the survey and the background document, the discussion paper, to allow for us to have a good overarching view of what's going on. And I might feel like that because I've been doing this for so long. So I'm seeing where we can go with it. But these, I think there's 10 questions here. I should have numbered them. But so I'm hoping that for our next session, this will be, so taking this content and then turning to the gaps that we're seeing as the caucus and what voices really, so that there's nothing in here about voices at the table, really. And how do you, I guess there is a bit, but really trying to bring this forward. So if we do it on the 27th of June, we have to, I think it's the 16th of July, to respond to the federal government. So we will give them what we heard from the caucus, but not from RCEN. So it's us as individual organizations bringing this forward. But also the understanding is, so this is a draft that we're working on right now. There will be another opportunity to come back and comment again once we see the strategy. So the discussion paper isn't really their draft NBSAP. It's a discussion paper about the background in the NBSAP, or at least that's my understanding. I'm sure there's people on this call who might have other opinions or might have looked at it and see other things going on. So the next piece I want to share with you, I'm going to share again, is so I want to, where is it? We're going to go back to, I should just, no, I don't know if it works, but we'll go back to the NBSAP page. Okay, and now I want to get rid of this on the top. Oh, so I'm going to go to Ontario Biodiversity Strategy because I see it in the corner. So in Ontario, so most of the provinces, because this was a national effort, most provinces have some form of strategy and action plan or statements or something going on. So in Ontario, so I live in Ontario and I'm a member of the Ontario Biodiversity Council for my home organization, by the way, is Sierra Club Canada Foundation. Should have said that a long time ago, but we just finished our goals and targets. So we have done our strategy to 2030, and this is our vision, our goals. So we're ahead of the curve. So obviously part of what I want to bring to the table is also what we think the federal government should be doing. So the way OBC, Ontario Biodiversity Council works is we have our council, which is made up of, I'd say we're made up primarily of ENGOs, but we also have industry and Indigenous representation and academic representation and youth representation, but it is the ENGOs that are primarily at the table all the time. But so this is a good model. So for me, I'm going to go back and look at what the feds are saying. So I'm trying to weave everything together. There's also one in Alberta. In Nova Scotia, there's a Biodiversity Act, which is the federal government, our federal government is wanting to go to that space too. I don't know what that would look like, and that is something they're trying to do by 2024 for the next Conference of the Parties that will be held in Turkey. But so this is the Ontario strategy, and whoops, I don't know why. I hope you don't go there. So in council, I mean, this model. So one of the things I'd like to see us, I didn't mean to do that. One of the things I'd like to see us do as a council or as the caucus is to take this model, which is really mirroring how the UN works, but it's only at the subnational or the Ontario level. So I think this is useful, especially if you're in Ontario. Get to know, learn to love, decide to protect this strategy in Ontario. And through the caucus, there's a lot of stuff we can do. And then there's the OEN network too. Fred, do you want to say something? No, okay, because I just see you're in the corner. So then there's other little things things I want to share. So this is the national, what is this? This is this image here. Oh, share. Are we share? Do we see it? Oh, yes. Okay. This is the image of the existing Canadian biodiversity strategy that was written in 1995. And this is something that I believe the act, when we're starting to talk about act and legislation and stuff, it will come out of here. And then this biodiversity outcomes framework is a good thing. So if there's a way for you guys to have a look at some of this stuff, if you're really trying to get into this wheelhouse, it's really useful because it's building on the past, so you can go forward to the present. And we're pointing to what worked, what didn't work, and we can enable it into the future. But the stop sharing screen. So the other piece I really do want to share, and okay, here we go. LPS Toronto Biodiversity, Edmonton. So there's an Edmonton strategy too I could show you. There's a Toronto Biodiversity Strategy. There's a Halton Region Biodiversity Strategy. So this is a national, we have a subnational, and then we have local governments that are doing this. So the idea of local government participation in biodiversity conservation, biodiversity understanding is really critical for more than one reason. Can you guys still see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you, Sheila. So, because it didn't work before, that makes my life way easier. So here, this is the, I want to do this. Why is it doing this? Oh, yes, this is what I want. So this document is the discussion document the federal government has brought forward. So this is one of.
Sorry, I can't see the screen either that you were talking about. And then Natalie just put in the chat that she can't see it either. So I don't think we can see your screen.
Okay, so I'm going to, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
And then Mia is wondering as well in the chat, what is the name of the document that you were referencing? Was it the National Biodiversity Strategy one, Canada's Biodiversity something? That one you just had up, I think might be the one. What's the name of that?
Yes, the most recent document. I'm sorry, I wasn't able to see what the source of that document was. I was only able to see the screenshot of the page.
So is that for the national strategy? So
It's the last document you just shared. That's part of my question. I don't know the name of the document, so I can't repeat it back to you. I'm sorry.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Is it this document? Towards the 2030.
I think it's that one that was written. Sorry, I think it was that one that was written in 1995 that you were sharing.
Okay, so so in this document, which is the discussion paper for what we're being asked to respond to in the survey. This is the background discussion paper that when they go, did you read the discussion paper? This is what they're talking about. So when I'm saying I think this is a pretty good document, this is part of the reason. So if you get this document and you open it up, so it goes through yada yada. It's only about 10 pages of stuff, but hang on, we're getting through the introduction. It was in this document, wasn't it? Oh God, hang on, I'm making you all dizzy. So
Yes, you just passed the page that you were showing us earlier with the vintage image.
yes, did I pass it or I'm coming to it? I think it's below, further below. Hang on, yeah, it's in this document though. Hang on, we're getting there. So I guess the point I'm trying to make, here it is. Here we go. There it is, right? Canadian Biodiversity Strategy.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And someone put it into the link. Thank you. Cass.
Share
Yeah.
the link.
Yeah, and so this is all in the discussion paper. So when you open the discussion paper, all these are live links, right? So they've really done a good job in directing us to information. So, and you go through it and Kunming, Montreal. So if you open the document, the discussion document, which I believe, Fred, that's what you put in the link. I can do that.
Cass did it.
Yes, okay, awesome. So if you open this document, all these links, the Canadian Biodiversity Strategy, the 95 one that I think will be the basis for an act, the outcome framework, really awesome work that was done by some bureaucrats, beautiful piece of work. I don't know how well it was implemented. 2020 goals and targets. This is what they had before. Kunming, Montreal. This is what we're working from right now. The background is the strat plan, the HE goals and targets, strat plan for biodiversity to 2011 to 2020. Pretty sure that's HE. So this is really a good document. It's a good surface background document that asks the same questions as the optional questions in the survey. So they've done a decent job, actually. I feel they've done a decent job at tying it all together for us, pointing us to this discussion paper, I don't know if there's a link to the survey in the discussion paper. I don't know about that, but it's convoluted because it's complicated. It's complicated, not necessarily complex, I think is what I would say. So, they talk about where they put their money. Like it's really quite well done. So I would encourage everyone to go and have a read of this. And then so in here they're showing, this is from the 2020. So every 5 years, I think it is. Fred might be able to correct me. They have to do a where you at with biodiversity in your country. So this is from the 2020 statement, or the review of where
The national reports.
Thank you. So this is from our 2020 national report. So it took the goals and targets from before and measured against it. So you have to do this so this is really a good document. And at the base of it here at the end, when we get to the annex, so I've got some comments on this, but I won't do it to you guys. And I'm sorry if I'm making everyone dizzy. I know I couldn't stand this. I'd be going, what's wrong with this woman?
Can I just add a couple comments?
Of course.
I had my hand up.
I can't, I'm not looking. Someone's got to.
Scroll by the questions, by the way, and then Rosalind, scroll back up one page or so. These are the questions that you were saying are the additional questions.
Correct. Thank you, Fred.
Yeah.
Way to go, Fred. See, teamwork. It's all about. Okay, Roz, go for it.
So one of the things that I often get asked or people kind of want to inquire about is the role of municipalities and provinces. And it is one of the conundrums, I guess, of a national biodiversity strategy that provinces have a lot of jurisdiction over public lands, and they also have jurisdiction over municipalities. So we know that municipalities are key, right? Land use change, the way we plan the way we approve developments, this has a huge impact on biodiversity. But they're essentially out of the hands of the federal government, so that the federal government can spend money, they can give money to municipalities, they can provide grants, but they can't necessarily, dictate to municipalities or govern. And they definitely can't do that with provinces. And so it's one of the ways that we're a little bit different from the US. So the federal government really is in this difficult position of wanting to rally the provinces and has to consult with them if they want to move forward with a national plan. So this is one of the things that Leslie was pointing out is Ontario's biodiversity strategy and Manitoba's and Saskatchewan's and BC's all might be slightly different. But one thing that we can do as a national organization that maybe the government's hands are even tied here is that we can encourage provinces to follow the international guidelines and the international protocols. So this has been quite successful in the past. Provinces have paid attention to the CBD, and they have incorporated parts of the CBD into provincial legislation. It's just that they need help, right? They need organizations like the National Biodiversity Caucus of RCEN and other organizations to kind of push them in that direction. So I just wanted to add that in.
Thank you, Roz. And the other thing I'll say with the local governments is subnational governments, and in the CBD world, subnational governments include local municipalities. So there's subnational and local governments. And through the UN model, it was really the local governments that were there first, subnationals kind of floating around out there in space. But the local governments, so in the outcomes of the COP, the Conference of the Party that was held in Montreal, so we're just talking about one outcome. There were 37 other decisions taken, right? Right now, we're just talking about the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, KMGBF. There were 37 other decisions, and one of them was from the subnational and local governments. So the province of Quebec, the Minister of the Environment for the province of Quebec was the lead seat for the local subnationals and local governments. And they're asking directly for funds from national governments and the local governments too. So in some countries, that's what happens is the funding for the strategies are put right in the coffers or are directed from national to subnational or subnational to local. Feds fund it. If you look at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and think about the work they've done on PCP, Partnership for Climate Protection, and recognize that funding, that comes from the Green Municipal Funds and the Green Municipal Aid Enabling Funds. And that funding was put in place in 2003. I think it was Jack Layton, who was the chair of the FCM at the time. And it was Paul Martin. I was going to Maurice Strong came to my mind. Paul Martin was the Minister of the Environment, and they announced those funds directing towards PCP work, Partnership for Climate Protection, Cities for Climate Protection, whatever you want to call it. And the municipalities, even though we don't have charter municipalities, they led the work. So one of the asks for the federal government is to fund through the FCM work on biodiversity goals and targets and strategies, right? That's one of the things 100% the federal government can do. And it's a way to circumvent the provinces a little bit, because that's where this started, right? The PCP stuff started at the local government. So I think there's a lot. So there's a lot to do, right? And there's Roz is 100% right. The provinces don't necessarily want to play ball, and it's worse right now than it was with our last in 2015. It was better what was coming through the provincial support. So one of the things I could show you is there was a 2-day meeting, first ministers meeting, Canadian ministers meeting in I forget where it was.
Japan?
No, since COP, the federal government met, so Guilbeault was with all his counterparts, and they were talking about this. So, okay, I'm going to stop sharing and go share that. But this is more the advocacy part, right? I mean, you know, but yeah, so there's lots we can do, I guess, is what I'm going to say. It's not, there's a lot we can do, and it's by learning and enabling and mainstreaming and getting together and saying, okay, we can do this. So and nature in the city, or ecosystem-based solutions for municipalities. The federal government right now, again, through FCM, if you're not following the FCM stuff, everyone should be following FCM. I guess that would be another thing I would say right now, because the FCM is constantly enabling some of this. So I did a lot of, when we were leading into the Kunming, like the post-2020 global biodiversity framework stuff, the subnational and local governments were meeting together, and I participated in a whole bunch of those meetings because I'm on the Ontario Biodiversity Council, and also because I know that's the primary one. And that work, like we have an Edinburgh Declaration for cities, like there's just, it explodes, but the nature in the city is really important, or biodiversity. So it's bigger than nature, biodiversity in the city. And then StatsCan from FCM. So I get their emails, and they were doing, John Coombs would be able to speak to this quite well. They were doing, StatsCan is wanting to know data around nature and this biodiversity in the cities. So, and that's one of their indicators for ecosystem health, but they are lacking the data for biodiversity. So protected, conserved, not conserved, but connected areas in the city. So there's a lot in there too, but there's so, like, this is such a big opportunity. Let's just put it like that. And because the Secretariat's in Montreal, so we as Canadians should be leading the pack. We've got, large swaths of stuff that's not completely torn apart. We've got a small population, like our footprint is pretty good, actually. If it was only Canada, it might not be that bad. Because it's in Montreal, I would highly encourage anyone who's interested in this stuff to wind up going to an intersessional. So the SBSTA and the SBI meetings that Fred had mentioned earlier, they're usually in Montreal, and so there'll be something at Christmas, I'm pretty sure, in December. Not necessarily when you want to go to Montreal, but usually do a June meeting too. They do. So we have COP in 1 year, and then for 2 years, you're kind of meeting in between, and there's a bunch of stuff all over the world, but there's usually at least 3 or 4 meetings in Montreal, and 2 of them, at least one of them is in the summer. So Montreal in July is a great place to go, and you can go participate in this and get to learn and engage with it. But it's really more than conservation. I think it's more than wildlife and animals and protected areas. It's huge, super important, but this is bigger than a conservation agenda. Would be where we as the caucus, a lot of times that's where we come at it from. And it's also it's huge in reconciliation. We haven't even gone to the idea of, so in the Ontario strategy, internationally, they talked about rights of nature and other spiritual or ways of understanding. And there's a couple of countries that have constitutionally, they have rights of nature in their constitution. There's a lot of work going on all over the place. Canada too is, rights of Mother Earth, or whatever we want to call it, non-human rights. But that conversation we got to start having too, if we really want to see, in my mind, right? But it's, yeah, now you're just getting a stream of consciousness, and I'm sorry. This is me being
You're speaking my language now, Leslie, and I know there's a few other people on the call who really are in line with that nature rights argument, right?
Yeah. Well,
I feel like we're going a little bit too fast for some people.
Okay, thank you.
I'm wondering what we can do is we are gathering together some reading and some links and resources that we can share with all of you after the meeting. So if you're feeling like, oh, something's important and I'm missing it, rest assured that we are more than happy to provide links to all of these resources and more after the meeting.
And I think we've done enough talking. I want to hear from everyone. I want people to like ask questions. I don't know if you've looked at it, say a little bit about why you're here, whatever it is. Like, we've got about 15 minutes or so to go through that stuff, and then we'll just do next steps. But I'm gonna pick someone. You have to watch out, eh? Because I pick on people if no one says anything. So Sheila, let's start with someone safe. Sheila,
Okay,
are not safe, but I know you've got.
okay, you can hear me right now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm really glad that you talked about the FCM initiatives and the importance and the opportunities to get things done at the level of the municipality. And earlier you mentioned about how the climate change agenda can kind of right now supersede biodiversity, although we can keep reminding people how intimately connected they are. But at any rate, when things were heating up, no pun intended, on the climate change front, a lot of municipalities around the world, they just dug in and they said, we're not waiting while all this discussion is going on. We're going to start working now. And that was, oh gosh, at least eight or 10 years ago. We were having those discussions at the UN Habitat meetings. So that's one thing. And for those people who aren't part of the steering committee, we were talking in our last steering committee meeting also about the subject of the rights of nature. And so kind of flagging that as one of the things that we want to concentrate on. And I think that's hugely important. And I just wanted to ask a question of Roz. You were talking about, let's see if I can find, anyway, you were talking about how the ecosystem benefits, aren't well understood. And you used the term ecosystem goods, I think it was, and I hadn't heard that used before. So I'm thinking that maybe that's being used in a larger context. So
yeah, I'm happy to speak to that actually.
Yes, yeah.
So we might be familiar with the term ecosystem services. There's a parallel UN process called IPBES, which is similar to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So they assemble all of the world's knowledge, I guess, on biodiversity, and they have suggested that we actually move away from the term ecosystem services due to its economistic overtones, right? So nature's not there just to provide services. And although it is the fact that these are undervalued, not valued, what their argument coming from IPBES is that we need to refer to these not as ecosystem services, but as benefits provided by nature for human well-being. So it's more about nature benefits or nature contributions. Now, I know that the term ecosystem services is still used a lot, and it's not a bad term. No, it's not. You can have conversations with economists, and other folks, business people, and talk about the value of nature and what it contributes to the economy. And that's not a bad thing. However, when we do that, we also kind of separate ourselves from nature, right? And kind of put it into a category, into a slot, and reduce it. And I think what IPBES is saying, and I can include some links here and background reading that if you like, but what they're saying is we need to think in terms of the contribution to human well-being that nature, is necessary for, which is slightly different than saying it's an ecosystem service for humans. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's, yeah,
Yeah, you know, and
it's a
when-
nuanced and subtle difference, but it's still a difference.
Yes, and when ecosystem services, when that term was first coined, it was because you know, people couldn't even relate to the value of nature, you know,
Right.
unless you put a dollar value on it.
Exactly.
And it's like species, as they become endangered, people start counting them.
Yeah,
You know, there are this
exactly.
many of this species of whale left, and that
Yeah.
many loons, and this many something else. So it's like they don't really start to become valued until they're just about extinct. And so anyway, but I think another way of thinking about it that's important for us to give voice to is, especially in the context of nature-based solution talk that's happening right now, is that ecosystems and nature function best when they're left alone.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
according to their divine design, they give the most.
Right.
So that we get away from this thought that we can manipulate this and manipulate and get in there and fool around with things.
Yeah, I
So-
agree. I agree.
Yeah. So, and we can, like, these conversations are really good conversations, generally. And there's a group out there that's been working on natural capital values and ecological goods and service. Like, there's whole swaths, there's biodiversity, like it just goes, it's exploding in the mind, but moving past the ecocentric approaches as opposed to anthropocentric approaches is that shift, I think. But I want to see who else wants to throw something in here. And then I'd like to, like, we are going to have another session. If there's something that's really, you know, burning your socks when you start looking at this, please be in touch with Cass or outreach or whatever. And we're going to try to facilitate that coming to the table. And if you think you want to bring your particular, looking at the survey and that, if you want to bring something to the table and be an expert, because we're going to start looking for expert speakers and voices. Like I'd like to find a municipal voice, an Indigenous voice, a youth voice, an agricultural voice, like a ecological farmer or a National Farmers Union, because that's a huge, like, so we're trying to get to that point too. But I'm really curious what other people are thinking, or first thoughts, or, oh my God, never gonna listen to you guys again, or Fred wants to come back, or something, like anything. I'm really hopeful that someone else can pipe in here. And I don't know how to do this, to invigilate this properly. So
it actually might be a good time to mention the next meeting and maybe throw up the slide. There's a slide on that.
yeah, so actually let's put that in the screen, and then I'm going to go through I've got little images at the top, right? Which is always dangerous. Or people at the top. Oh, now I can't see them again. Participants. Oh, okay. So I'm going to say, is there anyone else who wants to pipe in for a minute before I start just picking on people? Okay, I'm going to start with Jade. Jade, can you give us a reflection, like 30 seconds on what your interests are, or something like that? Like just anything?
I'm thinking that my perspective might be a little slightly different, because the lens that I'm looking through as the director as RCEN is how I can support the caucus as a whole and these conversations. So I feel like what you said about creating, or I think, sorry, Roz said about a resource at the end of this that we can share with everybody, kind of recapping some of the links that were mentioned. I think that would be very valuable, but then also creating maybe a space for people to add their comments after this discussion. Maybe not everyone is comfortable speaking, in this platform, but creating a shared document where you can add your thoughts and It's more of like a brainstorming page. That's kind of like the lens, but I do think that I guess at this point, trying to encourage people to give their thoughts on the surveys is really a big piece of this meeting. So I don't know if that's really a discussion piece for you, but hopefully it's something to get you started anyway.
Okay, so yeah, and then just why does biodiversity matter to you?
Oh, me personally?
Yeah.
Oh,
Or we can come back, but so think about that. So at the end, I'd like to go through in like 2 words on why biodiversity, what it means to you or why it matters to you.
yeah, no, I can speak to that probably now because I think that's a huge question. And I think that it's very broad, but then the two things I feel like that have come to mind even right away is the future. You know, one day I hope to have kids and I hope that they can enjoy in nature and grow up in nature. And, you know, some of the species that we're talking about, you can still see in nature. It's not going to just be in the history books, you know? So I think that for me, definitely opportunity for the future generations will probably be the thing that comes to mind first.
Thank you. So, and is it Tyrian Enon from CWF?
Yeah, Tyrian. Yeah.
Tyrian, do you want to contribute something?
I mean, I'm just taking all in. It's the first time I've heard a lot of this, so I'm just kind of listening and yeah.
So, and if you kind of think of what biodiversity means to you, do you have a sense of that, or you know why are you interested?
Well, I mean, my role at CWF is in the education department, working with young people, so it's kind of taking off of what was just said in terms of getting young people involved and yeah, being stewards for the future and things like that.
Okay, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. And okay, so does anyone else want to pipe in? You see what I'm doing now, eh? it's a come on. So how about Nat, who's here representing another of our affiliates from the New Brunswick Environmental Network?
Hi.
Hi, Nat.
Hi. Yeah, I don't know. I like what you were saying about changing the strategies, but there's so many options. I'm also kind of new to this world, but for me, biodiversity translates, like, my passion is plants. And I notice a lot when it comes to my environments, wherever I am. And as I travel my province and the other provinces, to me, one of the reasons that I'm like into this new biodiversity world is the loss of our forests. So, and I know that has a huge impact on everything from mycological to plants to animals, birds, you name it, insects. So that's how I'm trying to make an effect. And that's what I have to say.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So I'm going to ask John to say something really quickly. John, I think this is John Coombs, if I'm not mistaken. So John is another member of our steering committee, if it is John Coombs. Oh my. So I can't, I have no more pictures. I don't know why. But okay, so John, if you come to us, we'll come back. But how about Mia?
Hi, it's pronounced Maya.
Maya, I'm sorry.
No, don't worry about it. It happens all the time. I'm just going to stay off camera because my internet's just a little bit wonky this morning, if that's all right. So I apologize to folks.
Of course.
So I really appreciate you breaking down the survey and the underlying plenary and fundamental documents that are contributing to where the survey is going and then where we are headed in the future in terms of policy. So I'm mostly here just to deeply listen and learn. this is a relatively new space for me to understand the Canadian viewpoints. I finished my undergraduate degree in the Okanagan, and I've taken a gap year, and then I'm starting my graduate degree at Simon Fraser in the fall. So for me, during the gap year, I've spent quite a bit of time in the US. So I've had a chance to sort of compare and contrast what's happening in various different policies in Canada versus what's happening in the US. And my specific interests are in the intersection of art and commerce and natural conservation, and how we can sort of bridge these spaces in intersectional and interdisciplinary ways. To answer your question around what does biodiversity mean for me, I think that biodiversity is sort of a fundamental place for conversation that helps us to bridge the importance of cultural traditions, sort of environmental, economic, natural well-being. I think there are a lot of different places that allow us to bridge connections to each other as we move forward in the world. So I think that I'm excited to be here and learn from everybody who's been in this space much longer than I have.
Thank you. That was beautiful. I got tears in my eyes. So, you know, I'm a big suck. So, so Abiran, is that how I would pronounce it? Are you there? Oh, there you are.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, Biran is usually what people call me. Guys hear me?
A little bit. Are you, I'm struggling a little bit with clarity. I don't know how anyone else is doing.
I think it's my phone is a little bit off.
Okay. So that seems okay now. Want to give it a go?
Sure, yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, sounds good.
Awesome. So you can ask me what biodiversity means to me?
Sure.
It's definitely a big question. I guess it's biodiversity is kind of like what I see when I'm home at my parents' place. I look outside on my garden.
Okay.
It's kind of the richness of, you know, my parents really love gardening, there's a lot of plants, it's the richness of what I see when I look outside the window. There's kind of beauty to it, but I also understand what that means, sort of the bigger picture, like the importance of the diversity and species richness and how important it is for planting. But yeah, that's kind of like what biodiversity is to me.
Thank you. And how do you pronounce your name?
It's Abiran.
Abiran. Okay, good. Yeah, I did not too bad a job. So, John, I think you're with your. Can we hear you, John?
Yes.
Okay, John.
Am I not plugged in?
You're good. You're good.
Oh, okay. I think I completely support Roz's comments on the difficulty and the difference between the US and Canada and many other countries, that we have 3 effective levels of government. And I think the power of the people, if we can convince them that we have a case, even the situation in Alberta and Saskatchewan can be reversed, that this preoccupation with natural resources to the detriment of wildlife and physical beings of non-human sort can be sorted out. Secondly, I'm very encouraged by the work my former employer is doing on that basically seeking a program on the census of the environment. I think one way to counter is to come up with a credible formulation of a metric on the value of nature. Now, I agree, there's nothing like dollars in GNP to estimate where we're going and how's the economy. There are certain intangible natures, but even so, if we can stress, and Statistics Canada can stress in all the releases of such a figure, such a metric, I think it's important to underlie not only what we know in dollar terms of eco services, but the limits of the measure, which StatCan is very careful to do, probably in my estimation too careful, that it can weaken the message. But I think that work, I'm looking forward, and I'm in contact with the chief of the census program of the environment, as well as the Census of Canada. But I think it's absolutely essential to commit bodies out there, the public, that supports or does not support federal and provincial initiatives, that there is something here that is worth protecting. And I think that is going to be key in both the federal government's approach, the provincial government's approach, and municipal approach. And we're in an ideal space to facilitate that.
Thank you, John. So we're getting really, so we're a couple of minutes over. I want to be very sensitive to people's time. So I'm willing to go a little bit longer, but Jade, so I know there's a couple of people who haven't been able to speak to us, but Jade, right now, I want to turn the floor over to Jade, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I just had a couple of comments about, you know, what you were asking about, what does biodiversity mean to everybody? And also Maya spoke to, you know, why she is here at this meeting. And then, you know, like you're saying, Leslie, we are running out of time here, and it's important that we talk next steps. So I'm wondering if people want to write in the chat, you know, one word on what biodiversity means to them, and maybe a short sentence about why they're here, you know, and that might also help the discussion moving forward. And just in case I don't get a minute to say anything else, I just really wanted to thank the steering committee for putting together this presentation and getting us all together here. They're a very passionate and very educated group. So that was my piece and recommendation.
Thank you, Jade. So, and just so on that, we're going to have, so it'll be an evening at 6:30 Eastern for the next session. We'll have hopefully content experts. And from that, so this is the beginning of what we heard, but that will be much more targeted in the directionality of what we're doing. And it'll be asking specific questions. And hopefully, like, all this will go out earlier than, you know, we'll have a bit of a lead into it. And then the task homework for those who would like to speak, or those who will be presenting, will be to review the existing goals and targets, the strategy, and try to come to the table where there are gaps and things like that. So, and that will be the 27th at 6:30. Hopefully, you're all members of the caucus mailing list, and we can hear from you. And if you want to reach out, so I'm always willing to give people my personal email address for Sierra Club. So I'm going to pop that in the chat, and we won't close the room quite yet. But if anybody wants to reach out and have a chat about anything, I'm like geek on this stuff. I can't speak for everyone else, but Sierra Club. But so that is there. And then, so on the slide too, it says the draft strategy will be ready for review by the end of 2023. So I am going to do some good agitating or advocating or enabling so that we can, maybe there's a way we can have face-to-face. So through the affiliates, maybe do something locally to talk to local people. Like there's a lot of ways. John, I'd love to do a biodiversity views approach, but I think we don't have time. But is there anyone else who would like to say anything before we leave? Open your mic and give us your best. And if not,
Can I?
yes, of course you can.
So hi, I'm Ruping. I'm with the Alberta Wilderness Association. So I'm in the middle of that provincial federal divide that's happening right now. But yeah, I think I just wanted to say I agree that I think the key to biodiversity and climate and making people notice is to show how it affects them, not just this broad general sense, as important as that bigger picture might be, but to show how it affects kind of everyday life. And yeah, I guess I just think that if we lose biodiversity, we lose more than just the, the ecosystem services or more than what they can do for us. We lose what makes different areas unique and special, I guess.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. So, is there anyone else? So Chris, do you want to throw something on the table? You happen to be the next person who I see on my list. And then I think Mia Gill would be, and then and Yoko. Those are the three people I think who might want to add their voice still.
Yeah, thank you. I was just posting in the chat about the work that we're doing here in Washington State, working with the Southern Resident Orca. We've started back in 2016, and it's taken a while to get any progress made, mostly because people don't know what the rights of nature movement is all about. So it's mostly been about educating people. We've just had some recent really good luck. Starting last December, the city of Port Townsend actually signed a proclamation recognizing the inherent rights of the Southern Resident Orca. Once we got that city, others followed suit. So we now have 5 cities and 3 counties. What's interesting though is the fact that, most people want to know what the economic value is of the Southern residents. And I hear often, I think I'm just so grateful to the people who began this movement. It goes to Indigenous values, of course, but the fact that, there's so much we need to learn and so much left to learn about our planet, our environment, nature, and all of her beings. And I'm grateful for biodiversity. I'm grateful for life, because without biodiversity, we have no life. And the rights of nature movement has helped me evolve into a person who is so connected with nature now, as opposed to being sort of living with nature before. I feel like now I'm part of nature, that I see them as my family, as my kin, and that where I live, I'm the caretaker. And caregiver to everybody I get to live with here, the deer, the bear, the butterflies who are now out and about. But I'm just grateful for everything you're doing, and grateful that Roz has been helping us. And I'll shut up now because I feel like I'm talking too much, but please take a look at our website at legalrightsforthesalish.org and the info I posted. We could use all the support and help we could get, especially on your side of the Salish Sea. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chris. I agree 100%. Like that's the way, they're the plant people and the tree people and the bird people, and they're not even, they're bigger than we are. So I'm so on track. But and Mia, thank you. I hope it's Mia. I'm sorry if I'm messing your name up too. But so is Yoko, do you want to have a word before we leave? Oh, I don't know. Yoko, are you there? No, there's your message. Oh, thank you, Mia. Okay, so I'm not hearing Yoko and her mic isn't coming off and I think she might be on a phone. But so I thank you so much, and I'm energized and emotional from this call. And I thank everyone so much for participating. Does anyone want the last word? Fred, you want to have the last word? I want Fred to have the last word.
Glad to see the level of interest that we had today, and hope we can keep the momentum going and yeah, keep growing our network and have a greater impact. Thank you.
Okay, big hugs to everyone and enjoy the rest of your afternoon or evening or morning. I don't know where you're tapping in from, but very much appreciate it.